Well, hello everyone, and it's my pleasure as Chief Executive of Coram to welcome you to today's Future of Youth Forum. And I'm particularly pleased to welcome you to the brand new building for the Coram Institute for Children. The paint is still wet, the lift doesn't work, the tech hasn't all arrived, but the toilet's beautiful. So I'm hoping that you will give us 5-star reviews for the quality of the toilets. But there is nothing more important for us than we should start the use of this new space in what we're calling the Insight Lab as with the question of the future of youth, the voices and views and experiences of young people in the digital world, looking towards a future that by definition we do not know. And I don't think there has ever been a time at which that is more apposite than with the onset of AI, with the realities of screen life, and the digital first generation experiencing a post-pandemic impact. The event is being recorded, so please do sit out of line of sight if that is your preference. The fire exit is there. The lift is not functional, so do not attempt to exit through that way, but there are plenty of fire exits for safety on the other side. If an alarm goes off, it's quite likely it's the bloke downstairs testing the fire alarm, but I'm probably not supposed to say that. So if the fire alarm goes off, we need to move in an orderly direction. So let us consider the Coram Institute aims to be a think and do centre, a place to convene the conversation and ensure that high quality research evidence moves into policy and practice with the views and experiences of young people in participatory and peer research at its heart, and dedicated to finding new solutions to both the new and the old problems that children and young people face. So today's forum is about deepening our understanding of how the digital world is shaping lives of children and young people, to explore together what actually is known and what we can see, and what we do not yet know, what remains unclear and that we still need to understand. But most importantly, bringing experts together and the research and views of young people themselves generatively to explore these and to explore the disparities of view between the different generations on these issues. So we have a full programme of excellent speakers today. We do have tea, the kitchen is working, so that's great. And there will be a short break in the midway through the programme and time for collaborative discussion. If those toilets are full, there are more toilets on the way in if you go downstairs. And please do afterwards join us in the brand new Pathways Studio Cafe for refreshments at the end. I think we've got glasses. We have. I've got pot plants. So I hope that you will really enjoy being the first users of that as well. Oh, we've got wine. There you go, wine. So we will be watching the sun go down over the yard arm. So at the root of this event is this recognition of the fact that young people's needs, experiences and wants are not always taken into account in the discussions of the digital world and its implications. The lived reality is at odds with our experiences and concerns as an older generation. And we will be joined later by Coram's young ambassadors to share their thoughts about what they want us to know about some of these topics. But we have had the privilege of collaborating with friends at Channel 4 to learn about what their Core 4 and 4 youth ambassadors and communities think about the topics under discussion today. It did seem to me that that was an incredibly important place to start. If we want to know what the trends are, we should ask the media companies driving the trends. They know, even perhaps if we don't know. And so I'd like to draw your attention initially to some of the insights that the young people in their communities want us to hear. That growing up with smartphones and digital technology is fundamentally different from our generation, even a generational difference of a few years, characterized by extraordinary opportunities and challenges. But most importantly, it's an important part of our lives, but also one they can't escape. And they are very aware of that. They are also very much critical about the way that they're engaging with the digital world and what they find there. Two of our upcoming presentations look at how young people navigate information and misinformation online. But we can start here with the young people reflections on the skills they are going to need and what they're going to need to remain clear-eyed in the fog of the digital world. And importantly for everyone, they have set us the agenda. They're calling for more balance in how the adult world is guiding young people. Is it really all stranger danger? There's a strong demand for comprehensive digital literacy programs. I wonder who they think would be teaching them that. So I think that's a very interesting reflection. But crucial skills in internet safety, misinformation navigation, recognizing scams, and most importantly, critical thinking skills. On that, there appears to be unanimity between the generations. How is a different question, but what appears to have a unanimity? And rather than promoting complete technology avoidance, they're saying, well, actually, it's positive when it's used creatively. It's energizing, it's activating of our agency and our citizenship, even if it needs more balanced moderation. So we'll be hearing more from Channel 4 later, and thank you to their team, and thank you to their young people for setting the agenda that we need to address. Now, we're going to have Jan Forshaw opening the event, helping us to locate this moment in the broader trajectories of change. And Jan is the head of education of Coram Life Education for 30 years. Now, I say that because our intergenerational challenges in adapting to the modern world actually new, I wonder. Jan might beg to differ. So that's the largest children's charity provider of health and wellbeing in the UK, part of the Coram group of charities, and worked with about 620,000 children through our curriculum last year. Following Jan, we are very pleased that Colette is fully equipped with LEMSIP and is here as head of UK affairs at Five Rights Foundation, whose work we hugely admire, the charity whose mission is to build the digital world that children and young people deserve. Now, in the UK, Five Rights has developed and made the case for age-appropriate design code, which has driven changes since GDPR, and successfully campaigned for groundbreaking protections in the Online Safety Act. And I know she's going to tell us much more about that and the AI design code of conduct, which we hope is coming. So, first of all, thank you for being here. Bear with the paint, bear with the wires, don't trip over. Please enjoy the event, and please welcome Jan Forshaw to the platform.
Okay, so I've been given this clicker, I'm hoping it's going to work. And my presentation I've called, What Does Good Childhood Look Like? Actually, I've had about 10 different titles for this presentation. I've discussed it with colleagues. It's been tricky because what I've been asked to do is to give a sort of overview of everything. And this is such a complicated, massive thing. And I've got 20 minutes, so I'm going to do my best. One of the ones was, and I heard this said actually this afternoon, just as I was hearing people talking, the horse has bolted. Oh, we did think, has the horse bolted? Because we hear a lot of that, it's too late now. But anyway, I plumped for this because what we're really trying to do is think about what is the impact of technology on children and young people, and how can we make that safe and valuable. And it's very complicated. There's also quite a lot of polarisation about this debate, and I'm really conscious of that. But I think we're all agreed that what we do want is for children to be safe, happy, fulfilled, and to have, fulfilled lives. So I should just say as well that I'll be speaking mainly from the perspective of working with primary age children, because that's the age that Coram Life Education mainly works with. The numbers that Carol gave you, we do work with secondary schools, but we have a lot of primary schools and have had for many years. And I want to just start with an experience that we had, very recent, but we've noticed that over the last 2 years, I would say, there has been quite a shift in teachers asking for help and asking us to help them manage their class WhatsApp groups. I'm not kidding. They are so specific. What do we do about these class WhatsApp groups? That's the kind of thing. So the phone rings the other day, and you never know if it's going to be a head teacher saying, can you reset my password because I can't get onto your resources? Or my year 2 teachers don't want to say penis and vulva, even though it's now become statutory that they have to say it. How can I get them to use these correct technology for children's, well, for all body parts, humans' body parts, not just children's. So this head teacher was from a school in Lancashire actually, and she was wanting to find out more about new workshops that we've developed about online behaviours. And we specifically call them online behaviours because it's not about online safety, which children know a lot about safety. They know a lot about keeping passwords protected and that kind of thing. Whether they do it or not might be a different thing. But it's about how they are responding to each other. And so we said, oh, well, that's great. You want to hear more about it. Tell us about why you're interested. And then we just got this sort of tsunami of despair, really, from this head teacher. And we wrote it down. So I'm just going to read out some of the things that she said. She said, WhatsApp's a huge problem in and out of school. Bullying and unkind behaviour is really going off the scale with the children. This is the children. Need for immediate gratification. The teachers were really noticing this, that children were finding it really hard and getting bored and not tolerating that boredom. Concentration problems, achievement dropping off. One boy in particular who had been a high achiever and had recently got into playing Fortnite, and it seemed to have just taken over his whole mind. Now, eventually that might be a brilliant thing, but at the moment he wasn't getting a balanced education. And one thing which was particularly concerning, she said, was normalisation of harmful and violent language. So the children were talking a lot about knives in school. She wasn't concerned that they were carrying knives, but it was just a kind of normal thing for them to be talking about, which it hadn't been even a year ago. She said she wasn't interested in internet safety, password protection, but it was all about behaviours. And she really wanted it to start earlier. And she mentioned critical thinking, which obviously Carol mentioned, we know is central to this. And the government are sort of waking up to that as well now. Another deputy head teacher that I spoke to last week, I rang her about something else, and I just always say to people, how are you getting on in school with, how are you finding things with digital devices and so on? And this was, again, it was a kind of floodgates open tirade. And she just said, well, WhatsApp is lethal. That was the sort of kick off. And she means class WhatsApp groups. These are the things that we're hearing a lot about, because they're so hard to regulate. People don't know what's going on in them. And she said that over the summer, a parent of one of the children in the school had demanded from the head teacher a meeting during the summer break, because the parent's daughter had been very upset by a comment in a class WhatsApp group. And the parent of the child who'd made the upsetting comment, are you following this so far? Thank you, well done. I've practiced this. Was a teacher in the school. So the parent wanted a meeting, now to sort this out. So the sort of expectations of parents seems to be getting, really huge. So just a couple of little things there. So that's a bit of a backdrop, and that's being our experience at the moment. We are really noticing this and a strong uptick, an increasing uptick. So I don't know if you know this person. Anybody know who that is? This is not a test, it's a quiz. He's called Melvin Kranzberg. He's American. And in 1995, he actually wrote the 6 laws of technology, which I just found out while I was doing a bit of research for this work, for this presentation, actually. And the first law of technology, according to Melvin, is that technology is neither good or bad, but nor is it neutral. And so it has social, cultural, political, financial and commercial aspects as well. And so we're just going to go back down memory lane now and think about how we've got to a point where we've got technology that's impacting so massively on all of us. And we will admit that technology is a great thing. Who would want to give up their smartphone? Just pop your hand up if you'd be quite happy to give up your smartphone. Some people, that's good. That's good. We've got balance even in this audience, but maybe not today. And we're just going to think about kind of how we got from where we didn't have phones or other devices are also available to where we are now. We've got head teachers calling us up because they've got these desperate problems. So just think back to your first memories of, let's say, mobile phones, as we used to call them before they became smart. And that will be different in the room because we've got people of different ages. Those of you like me who were born quite a bit before the end of the last century will have different memories to those that weren't. And the overriding memory for me was that they were huge, weren't they? They were absolutely massive. And you know, people now talk about give children a brick phone. They don't know what they're talking about because the brick phones were really literally like a packet of cream crackers or Jaffa cakes. They were massive but heavier. And they were actually invented or rather came into the market with Motorola in 1983. And in fact, it was 10 years earlier that the first call was ever made using the Motorola phone. Okay, and then do you remember the BlackBerry? People would be softly with BlackBerries, weren't they? Do you remember that? And do you remember that there was a 3-day outage of BlackBerry in 2011, I think it was. And it was really interesting because I remember hearing about that, and actually some people said even then how liberating they had found that. So, you know, reflect on that now and think, oh yeah, I can imagine that, because it is a panic. If you think you've lost your phone, it's the most awful panic, isn't it? But very, very fascinating. So we've come a long way. We've now got something that can very easily slip into a pocket, be hidden, and that can give a person, including children, access to anything that's available on the internet. And some of it's fantastic, and other elements are not. And we know a lot, and there's a lot of talk in the public discourse about all the very specific harms. So things like child pornography, children seeing pornography, you know, all those different kind of things, exploitation. There are also some less explored or less publicised harms, and I'm going to be thinking about a couple of those in the next few minutes. And in fact, one of the things, whoops-a-daisy, there's a slide missing there, but not to worry. I was going to show you two what we call well-being wheels, but it's somehow disappeared. I'll just show you this. Can you see that? Yeah, they'll come back later, don't worry. We'll capture them. So we have well-being wheels, and you may know the New Economics Foundation. This is really like class teaching now, isn't it? Can you all see that? Oh, what happened? Or did you magically? So we've got the physical health and well-being wheel and the emotional well-being. There's some crossover because obviously the active is part of one. And we're just going to start with these things. So these are things that we need, not just children, but maybe especially children, but all of us as humans, in order to be able to function relatively normally. And we'll come back to the emotional health and well-being one in a minute. And the first thing, I'm not sure what's going to happen now, is sleep. Now, sleep is something that we kind of take for granted, don't we? And we hear, oh, you know, you need to get sleep, and we talk about that a lot. But it's really, really impactful. Has anybody read this book? Quick show of hands if anybody's. Thank you. I would thoroughly recommend it. It's actually, although it's written by a leading neuroscientist, it is quite page-turner. And every page is a fresh shock. I can guarantee you it's, oh my God, I can't believe this. And I'm just going to read you a few key statistics. And bear in mind, imagine this in relation to children. And apologies if you've already heard this. Sleep deprivation, and we're talking about 6 hours or fewer out sleep over a period of time. I don't mean 6 hours spread out over time. I mean regularly, only getting fewer than 6 hours of sleep. A person that's sleep deprived to this extent is 7 times more likely to experience feelings of helplessness. They are 5 times more likely to feel lonely than people who get enough sleep. And they are 60% more emotionally reactive when they're sleep deprived. The amygdala, which you'll have heard of, is sort of buried really deep in the middle of the brain. which is the bit that's responsible for triggering emotion. So it's the part of the brain that does that. And it's excessively reactive when we're sleep deprived. And you might be interested to know, when you wake up in the morning, if you feel a bit kind of, that's because the other parts of your brain, like the hippocampus, haven't properly woken up, prefrontal cortex rather. And so you're firing much more on the amygdala. So that's why after about half an hour, you probably feel like you can face the day a bit better. And it's called sleep inertia. And so it's impacted even more if a person has less sleep. So sleep inertia there'll be more kind of drag, if you like. This is particularly significant for children who are, going through exam phase, impacts on ability to remember previously learned information. And people who experience chronic sleep deprivation are 10 times more likely to have depression and 17 times more likely to have anxiety. So it impacts on every aspect of emotional and mental health and well-being. Okay. So this report came out in September. Some of you may know this. Just quick show of hands again. If you have seen this report, it's definitely worth seeing if you haven't. And because you know that a big issue at the moment in school, particularly since COVID, is absenteeism in schools. And this report was launched just last month. Harriet was at the event where it was launched. Not she didn't launch it. And you were actually messaging me, Harriet, weren't you, saying, gosh, this is just, listen to this. They've just said this. And these were some of the things that they've just said. That the main reason that pupils were citing for not coming to school, for missing school, was exhaustion. So this is just linking to what we've been talking about, sleep. And I'll just give you a moment to read those. I won't read them out. I'll assume that you can read. And then the next slide, which talks about something that was named presenteeism. And I find this particularly sad and kind of, just sad really, and a bit as well as disturbing, that young people, there's a kind of collapsing of boundaries of when they need to protect their own mental health and look after themselves. So they're very much concerned about being available for friends all the time, 24 hours a day. And it's one of the reasons. And I would imagine, this is completely a guess now, but I imagine that for girls, that's particularly the case. That they feel, I've got to be there if my friend needs me. And I just found that really, really disturbing as well as sad. And one of the recommendations within this report was about much stronger support from government to develop clear social norms. And as my colleague Justina said, well, we've got social norms already about phone use, and I think it really means healthier. And when you dig down into the report, it does actually specify healthier norms around technology. And it includes actually having a tech contract with parents for healthy digital habits that's flexible but non-negotiable. So I thought that was quite interesting. And shifting digital culture, which we know there are organisations, grassroots organisations, and there's some in the room today, whose job is very much that. They're looking to try and shift the norms around sort of things like when children are given a smartphone. And on the subject of that, just hang on a second, I think we may have gone out of order, but not to worry, I'll come back to that, because we do know that now, I think it's 37% of 3 to 5 year olds have their own smartphone, they own their own. And also, out of that 39%, I think it's something like 20% have social media accounts. Thank you, got it. I don't know what's going on here. We've got the gremlins in the room with the slides here. But yeah, so there we go, 37%. They use social media actually. So 19%, apologies, have a smartphone of 3 to 5 year olds. And of those that use social media, almost 20% are using it independently without parental supervision. And that's not a huge number, but I think it's still quite surprising to think that some children, that is potentially happening, and that could be something that we don't know what they would be seeing. Nobody does. Just a few more statistics. This is all from this year's Ofcom report, by the way. You may have seen this, you may be familiar with it. And just again to say that it's not all a bad picture. that children and young people are using technology in a way to support their mental health and their well-being and their physical fitness as well. Obviously, it depends on the quality of the apps that they're using, and we know that some of them are questionable and some are brilliant. And then on the downside, the one that surprised me particularly, or rather interestingly, it didn't really surprise me, was this third one here, that bullying on social media is now more common than in person. So that's been a gradual shift. Just coming back to the wellbeing wheels, we're going to go now and move over to the emotional health and well-being. And I think this is going to help us to think about the particularly under-discussed issues, and it's one that we refer to as opportunity cost. You'll be familiar with that term, I think. So we do know that children are spending a lot of time, and some children are spending many hours a day on devices, whether it's smartphones or tablets or whatever. So they're spending a lot of time, and a lot of that is quite passive. So they're just reading or watching or looking or scrolling or whatever. And so we also know that research shows us about being a healthy human that we need to do different things in our life. We need this balance. And this is New Economics Foundation research from many, many years ago. But I don't think it's changed. The NHS picked this up and ran with it in their 5 Steps to Wellbeing programme as well. And during the COVID pandemic, we at Coram Life Education, we ran a daily diary from Harold, who's our little giraffe mascot that some of you may already know. And he did a daily diary Monday to Friday every week during the pandemic. And we used this as the basis for helping children. So this went out to children via schools who were pushing it out to parents and so on, and children who were remaining in school as well. And we got them to think about each of these. So one of these segments of the wellbeing wheel was used for each day of the week. So we had Mindful Monday, Workout Wednesday, that kind of thing. Try Out Tuesday, that was, you could tell we had a big meeting about this, can't you? But we were virtual, so there were no biscuits. And we did all this, and we came up with lots of ideas, and we got children to actually send us pictures. We got permissions to put them on our website of things that they were doing to try and promote these things, so that because we were very conscious that there would be this very sudden shift to using screens a lot. One of the things here was a little sun catcher, so it was something they made. They froze it, and then they had to dangle it in the sun and let the sun come through, and then it melted, but that's okay. Watching raindrops coming down, we had a little film of Harold watching the rain. I live in Yorkshire, it didn't take long for it to rain and make that film. We did sculpture, things that you can find in your back alleyway or whatever to make some sculpture. This is Ethan, who learnt his dad's guitar, or so I heard. We might see him on television one day during lockdown, and we got the story of him, one little boy who'd done a lot of planting, because Harold was growing carrot tops, so this child made their own plants. And this was a particularly moving story because the dad told us that his son was really, really sad during lockdown. He wasn't with his friends. So there they are up in Tyneside playing cricket in the back alleyway. And opportunity cost is something that's a big thing, and all of our workshops, we look at these 5 ways to well-being in nearly every workshop. There'll be ones running now in the country right now, and our educators will be talking about that. And one of the reasons that children are spending so long, of course, we know, is because the content that they're looking at is designed to be addictive. And we have now a film of Baroness Bevan Kidron, who some of you will know. She was founder of 5 Rights, who you're going to hear more about from Colette. And we interviewed her earlier this year as part of some Newcastle University research that we were doing. And this is what she said about this issue of addiction. Fingers crossed that this will work. Yes.
I think it's really important when we think about smartphones to think about the addiction part, and that's sort of underplayed in the public discourse. That we really worry about content, we worry about strangers, but actually, if you're like me and you spend a lot of time with young people and children talking about their online life, the thing that they are most concerned about is what they call brain rot. The time spent scrolling through things that you don't really care whether you've seen and don't have any meaning, and sort of low quality. And I think at different ages, and that's something I'm very, very concerned about, that people think about this as ages of development, because different things are suitable at different ages, but at different ages, the opportunity cost of always being attentive to your phone can be catastrophic. And so if I give an example of early years, where actually, literally, we're seeing children arrive in nursery or reception and they can't speak, they don't have proper language development, they don't know how to look at people, you know, they don't get the emotional cues, and also they can't physically work because they've had too much screen time. That's one version of it. And you might come to a tween or a teen who says that they feel abandoned by their parents who are always looking at their phone. And so the addiction piece is not any one person's problem, but actually think about the rest. Where else do we allow people to, to sell and to design and sell products, that are deliberately addictive, and then put them in the hands of very young children? Unbelievably stupid.
And you probably know that Baroness Kidron is a very strong advocate for children's rights in terms of digital use, not banning digital devices, but in terms of advocating for their rights, and Colette will talk about that. Some of the examples of persuasive design that she talked about there. And we did some research, which I mentioned earlier as well, with Newcastle University earlier this year. And sorry about that. We did some paired work with dyads of parents and children talking together. So we had a big focus group. And I was concerned that they might not talk very much. We did it online, so I thought it's not ideal. But I was amazed at how much they opened it. There were 9 to 11-year-olds, primary school children with their parents. And the sort of 4 things that really came out to me. And I remember after we did this call, it was a cold February evening. And, we were all shivering there. And I was just the kind of one of the hosts, really. I wasn't asking the questions. That was the university staff. But the 4 things that really came strongly out from that, and the things that the children were saying and the parents, were that children were confused and they needed help, they wanted help. They knew there was a problem, but they didn't know how to manage it. And that was kind of the same for the parents, actually. And it's a bit like it's not really a very fair fight, is it? Because it's very hard for parents to keep up with all the information. So that came out strongly. The children said they wanted more PSHE about this very issue, which I thought was really interesting. And parents were just floundering. They were just kind of, we don't know what to do. We don't know whether to give them a phone. If we don't give them a phone, they'll be left out. That whole debate, which we're very familiar with, that very difficult choice that parents have to make. And they also wanted more help in shifting the norms around smartphone use. Okay, just very quickly now, because I realise I'm over time. If you haven't already seen it, this is a really good read as well. The Molly Rose Foundation, you'll be familiar with Molly Russell, who died through suicide, I think 7 or 8 years ago now. And Ian Russell set up this foundation in her name. And they've recently reported on how tech companies are responding to the requirements, and particularly of the legal requirements that we now have in the UK. And it seems like nothing's happening very quickly. And I think that's one of the issues that we have. It's about how long do we wait for things to be put right before we decide to take a more precautionary approach, really. So definitely a really worthwhile read. And then also, just very quickly, we attended the launch of the Girl Guides, I think it's actually National Girl Guides Association. I should know I am a brownie leader for something I did badly in a former life, I think. I'm very part-time at that job. And just some of these things, this tells us about the impact, particularly on girls, which we know is a very specific issue. You'll be able to get this report online easily, but I just thought you'd be interested in this. This wasn't even asking about phones, but it did show that there has been this increase, which we have seen evidence of elsewhere in sort of sadness and mental health decline. Body image, huge thing for girls. And the girls wanted the government to step in and take more action, which I thought was interesting. I'm going to leave the final word to Beeb and Kidron. Do we need more research?
The research question, so interesting. Yes, we always need more research, but I also think we need a little bit more common sense. That is to say, if all the teachers in the land are telling you that kids are coming to school tired, yeah, then I think they're probably up all night answering messages. If all the parents are saying there's conflict in my home when I try and take my 3-year-old, my 13-year-old mother to do something else, then maybe we can understand that the kids are being deliberately addicted. I think that there is a nonsense developed, and I think the nonsense is as a result of billions of lobbying dollars, that it's like, we don't know. Why don't we know? We don't know because they won't let us in to look. Why are we going to pay for more research when we're blocked from what it is? They've got the data, and every time there's a whistleblower, what do we find? It's not good for us. Yeah? So how about a bit of common sense and say, until you can prove to us that this is okay, you can't deploy it to kids. That would be an interesting thing. And I particularly want to say that in relation to EdTech. They are going into our schools, they are taking data from children. Children have absolutely no choice. And most of it, I don't know how much all of it, but most of it is unproven and is probably little better than Victorian learning, rote learning with better graphics. And I think it's the other way around. You do the research. You, tech company, do the research and show us it's okay. I don't understand why everybody's willing to wait another generation of kids who are miserable. Yeah, they tell me who are miserable. Yeah, to have to withstand this system instead of saying, actually, you can't roll out a motor car unless you hit all these other things. You can't roll out an app for kids unless you've actually told us how it works and what it does, and show us the research.
And you should be really aware too that Baroness Kidron works with a lot of children and young people, and perhaps that's something that Colette will talk to you about. So I'd just like to now introduce Colette, and thank you very much for listening, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks so much, Jan. I was a bit worried then when you played some videos of B-Band that she was going to say what I was saying, but a little bit, but I can expand on it. So hello everyone, I'm Colette and I'm from Five Rights, and thank you so much to Coram for having me this afternoon. As an organisation, we work very closely with children and young people. We do research, we work with engineers on technical standards, and we provide expert advice and evidence to policymakers and regulators around the world. We do this because it is our aim to see designing with children in mind become a tech industry norm. I think in order to sort of effectively diagnose the impact of tech on children, we need to learn from them directly about what's happening. So when I was preparing for today, I put out a call to our UK youth ambassadors and I asked them to keep a tech diary for one whole day. I said, just keep a log of kind of the apps and services you're using, when you use them, and then jot down anything else you think might be interesting to know. And then I asked them just to make a quick sort of final reflection at the end of the day, just to talk about how it made them feel. So with his permission, I want to share with you a tech diary from Hayden, one of our ambassadors who lives in Gravesend in Kent. So this is Hayden's Saturday, 10 a.m. As it's a weekend, I have a lie-in, and this means the first thing I do is check my phone. I received about 5 to 6 notifications from Snapchat. These are streaks from my friends. A Snapchat streak tracks how long you and your friend have been in contact for, and it sets a timer of 24 hours to respond to their snap. This can be a picture or a video. Because there's a timer, I have an incentive to respond really quickly so that we can maintain this streak. I don't have Instagram notifications turned on in my settings, but I'm aware that I might have missed some overnight, so I check these quickly too. I'm distracted by this. I mainly use Instagram for messaging my friends, but the content I'm shown on there is tailored to me. I'm shown videos about games, guitars, comics, and movies. I check my friends' Instagram stories at this point too. This is all done before I go downstairs to breakfast at 11. I enjoy playing guitar and I like to use YouTube to watch videos of guitar lessons. So I go back to my bedroom to do this immediately after breakfast. However, as soon as I open the YouTube app, I'm shown these much shorter clips called YouTube Shorts. These are really addictive and they play on an endless scroll. I'm scrolling on YouTube for about 25 minutes where I decide to exit my bedroom and go to the lounge. In my family, we use PlayStation 4 as our media station. I turn it on, I watch more YouTube. From 12 until 2, I'll play on my PlayStation 5 and talk to my friends on PlayStation voice chats, and then I listen to music on Spotify. In the intermissions while the game is loading, I check my phone looking for memes my friends have sent within direct messages or in group chats. This repetitive behaviour probably lasts around 30 to 50 seconds each time I do it. At 3, I eat a late lunch and I take a break between gaming and I go back to watching YouTube with my family. We watch news clips. YouTube plays adverts between each video and sometimes in the middle of the video. I've noticed recently that there's been an influx of AI-generated videos of well-known and trusted individuals which are scams. I've seen ones of the finance expert Martin Lewis trying to sell a quick money scheme, and I've seen other examples of fake adverts promoting misinformation about the conflict in Gaza. From 4 until 7, I spoke to some friends on Instagram and I listened to Spotify while I did the washing up and while bathing. Then between 7 and midnight, I had dinner and I binge watched the entirety of the show, The Hack. When I think back on my day, my time online hasn't been very productive. I was glancing at my phone quite a lot. The content that I've been consuming hasn't been very stimulating, as the algorithm has suggested posts on my feed. There are two things I just want to sort of jumped out at me from Hayden's diary. I think the first was how all-encompassing digital services and products were throughout his day. You know, it's from the moment he woke up, from the moment he went to bed, he was plugged in some way, whether he was listening to music, practicing guitar, playing games, even when he was sat socializing with his family. And then the second, I think, is just the poignancy at the end of the day when he felt he hadn't been very productive. You don't have to be productive on a Saturday, but when Hayden was thinking about how he'd spent his time, he felt that it wasn't well spent. And you get the impression that he didn't feel great about it. It's Hayden's sort of final reflection that I want to sort of focus my time on today. I think what this illustrates about childhood and how young people are growing up, how the tech industry and its rapid pace of innovation has sort of warped childhood in some respects, and finally what we can do to sort of to claim that back. So our 5 rights, when we speak to children and young people about how being online makes them feel, they often don't sort of like raise like a bit of content that they'd seen that upset them or a particular thing that had happened. Instead, a lot of the time, what they describe to us are sort of features of the online world that they don't like, chiefly the way it's designed, and they always have big ideas about how they would change it. It's worth saying that children and young people, they love being online, like the connection and all the information, and it just has infinite possibilities for creativity and for play. It's ubiquitous across their lives, and it's also, they don't really discern between online and offline the way that we do. It's all their life. However, there are lots of things that they don't like about it. They tell us about the constant pressure to always be online, to be posting content, to be using the same apps as everyone else, and to present this perfect version of themselves. Many describe to us this feeling that they feel addicted to it, and they also really worry that AI is going to make everything much worse. And these feelings they're pervasive and they're widespread. Research shows that over a third of children feel pressured to use the new apps just to keep up with their friends. Many will turn on features like location sharing, even if it makes them uncomfortable due to peer pressure. Girls in particular feel intense pressure to project a perfect version of themselves. They commonly use beauty filters, and some say they wish they always looked as they do with a filter on. In some research that Ofcom carried out, one girl explained that she uses filters so often that the platform just adds them automatically now, smooths over blemishes without her input. Like Hayden, children also describe that being fed this sort of meaningless, fast-paced content, sometimes referred to as brain rot, as Bevan talked about, through endless scroll. And they also talk about that sort of feeling of guilt or frustration, like not feeling great about it afterwards. They don't like how hard it feels to put their phone down. We know from decades of research on child development that teens are shaped by peer influence, they struggle with self-esteem, and they're prone to compulsive behaviours. But tech companies know this too, and they design platforms that exploit these traits. Features like infinite scroll and algorithmic recommendations are built to keep kids online, not to support their well-being. This isn't accidental. It's how these platforms make money, by keeping users engaged and harvesting their data at any cost. And the consequences of this go far beyond disruptive sleep or the rising mental health concerns that we all talk about and hear about a lot. What is led to is a reshaping of childhood and our established social norms. So what are some of these norms, and how has tech sort of transformed them? I think firstly, let's consider the age of when we consider someone a child. Offline, we recognise this as anyone under the age of 18, and they are afforded legal protections and they have rights under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. However, online, the digital age of consent and data protection regulation has been set at 13, allowing children as young as 13 to create social media accounts, share content, and engage with platforms with far fewer safeguards. This mismatch means that while a teenager is legally considered a child offline, online they're treated like an adult and without the same level of protection. Consider also the frictionless and routine exposure and access to adult content and spaces which have become really normalised online. So recent research from the Children's Commissioner for England found that some children are now encountering pornography online as young as 6, with half of teenagers reported that the first time they ever saw pornography online, it was by accident. The same research has found that early exposure to violent pornography can lead to distorted ideas about consent, gender stereotypes, and what are considered healthy sexual behaviours. Loot boxes, which are randomised rewards you can buy in lots of online games, are designed in ways that closely mirror gambling, both structurally and psychologically. And with 93% of children in the UK playing online games, this kind of exposure is widespread, normalised, and happening from a very young age. Obviously, with the Online Safety Act, some of this will begin to be sort of dealt with or tackled, particularly on adult content, but that won't yet account for the newer, more complex risks, such as AI companionship bots, which are very popular with children, which reports have found are programmed to engage children in sexualised conversations from as young as 8 years old. It also doesn't help, obviously, the millions of children who have been exposed to this in the last 2 decades and more. Their childhoods are already lost, and the long-term impact this has had on their development. Offline, we have long established clear boundaries on the access to adult content and experiences through age ratings on films and other widely accepted social norms. But online, these boundaries have shifted or vanished entirely, leaving children exposed to material or experiences we would never deem appropriate in any other setting. And finally, I think the near total loss of privacy. And like when I was growing up, children today don't get to grow up in private. Everything they do online, their every click, search, message, and movement is tracked by tech companies harvesting their data for profit. Researchers found that this footprint begins when children are still in the womb. It's not just data collection, but also the footprint that children create of themselves through these persuasive design techniques in order to fit in with their peers. As I noticed earlier, the privacy is often given up even when they're uncomfortable doing so, and most of the time it's without their knowledge or their informed consent. This constant surveillance erodes their ability to develop autonomy, independence, and their sense of self. As we know, privacy is a developmental necessity, and children must be allowed the space to grow, make mistakes, and explore their identities without this constant surveillance. But for children growing up today, these moments are increasingly rare. Instead, childhood has become something that is observed, recorded, and monetized. These are just 3 examples, and they're just a snapshot of how sort of childhood has been reshaped by the tech industry. This hasn't happened by accident, and it's not an inevitable or natural progression of time moving on. We don't have to accept it. This is not an unstoppable force. It's a set of choices, systems, and designs that can be challenged, changed, and reimagined. So how do we reclaim childhood? We must first start, I think, by sort of addressing this imbalance of power, and we can reassert our social norms and already established rights. So first, we must recognise childhood online. A child is a child until they've matured, not until they set up a social media account. The current age of adult in a digital world is set at 13, which is based on a piece of US marketing law known as COPPA, and then just reflected unthinkingly in GDPR. A child of 13 is not an adult, and we must insist as much. Secondly, we must recognise children have existing rights under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and that these follow the child. They apply to all digital products and services that children are likely to access. We must resist the temptation also, I think, to sort of break the problem down into requiring different responses and rules to different products and services. I think sometimes there's a sense that we need a new deal for smartphones, we need a new plan. Social media, we need new rules and plan, new regulation for online gaming, for AI. This serves industry interests and it blurs the big picture. We must take a holistic approach and apply children's rights everywhere. And we know and have categorized what the risks to children are online, and we know how to mitigate them. Which leads me to my third point, is that children must be considered upstream. Whether it's building a new tech product or adding a new feature to an existing sort of website or app, or even the guidance we develop to keep children safe online, children have to be considered early on. It's not enough to expose children systematically to various risks and then rely on sort of information pages or disclaimers. For example, we know children are using ChatGPT, but it's not enough that buried in the small print it says that responses may include incorrect content. This ignores what we know about children. They're not going to read them and they're not going to follow that advice. The focus must be on due diligence and proactively doing the necessary groundwork to identify risks and implementing safeguards to prevent harm before it occurs. Fourth, we should not ask children or parents to hold the responsibility for badly designed systems. To be clear, obviously, media and digital literacy are essential. And of course, parents should and will talk to their parents about the online world, and they may even put in place specific rules just for their family. But in our conversations with children, we find that often if something's gone really badly wrong, they usually blame themselves. Indeed, some adults blame them too. Why? Because a lot of digital resilience and digital literacy is geared towards teaching children about bad actors and bad behaviours, and it fails to explain growth strategies and persuasive design techniques deployed by tech industry, which are often at the core of really bad outcomes for children. In most cases, the companies we're talking about are valued at trillions of dollars, but there's still a perception that it is up to children to be resilient and it's up to them to navigate these very risky services rather than for these companies just to make safe products. We can't ask parents and teachers to shoulder this burden alone. If you get in a car, you will put a seatbelt on your child, you'll make sure the doors are locked, you'll check your mirrors before you pull out. But you've got a reasonable expectation that the car you've bought, that the brakes work, and that if you're driving down the street, that the street lights are going to work. And finally, we must measure success based on outcomes for children. And our approach must be tech neutral. As I've said, it's not just about social media, but it must be outcomes based because companies must be encouraged, incentivized to do what they do best, innovate to the desired outcome, which in this case is putting children's best interests before profits. They can optimize not just for growth, but also for children's safety. So just to wrap up, childhood is changing, and not always in ways that I think that are immediately visible. Beneath the surface, there are deeper, more harmful shifts, I think, to our social norms at play. Much of what we think we know about childhood and the social norms that support it have been reshaped by the tech industry. And I think too often we're told we simply need to accept this and adapt to this new digital reality, but we don't have to accept it. We can push back. This means reasserting the social norms that have long protected childhood. They are not outdated. They are the foundation of a healthy society. Just as we shaped norms before, we can shape them again, but it will take intention, it will take regulation, and it will take a collective commitment to put children's well-being ahead of profit. But I think the good news is that the tide is beginning to turn. While the road has been bumpy and resistance from tech industry remains, there is now a broad consensus about the outcomes we want to see for children online. In the UK, we have the Online Safety Act, which beyond the headlines enjoys strong support from the public and the government. And similar laws have now emerged in the EU, Australia, Brazil, and are currently about to be considered in Canada. We've also got the Data Protection Act and the Age Appropriate Design Code, which has already pushed the world's largest tech companies to make meaningful change to children's safety and development. It's explored in this report here. And this approach is now being adopted across the globe. Even the language coming from tech companies has changed. Today, they agree, at least in principle, that children should be safe online. That kind of alignment was unthinkable not that long ago. So yes, there are still big fights to be had, but the direction of travel is clear. Now it's just about ensuring that this growing consensus is applied consistently across every part of the child's sort of online lives, from play to education to family life. Thank you.
Well, that was absolutely fascinating. Thank you, Jan and Colette. We're sitting in a very old place. And in a former part of my career, I used to be the Director of Marketing at the British Museum. And therefore, I was thinking it was quite interesting just to sort of step back a bit in history and think how long it took us to get to a point where children were effectively not working and occupying the adult world from the moment they could walk until the point that there was this concept of childhood. And how hard that fight was and how long it took and how quickly it is unraveling. So I just think it's really interesting to think what is going to be, what reflection are we going to make in 100 years' time, given that we're on the cusp of the 1926 adoption legislation, the general strike and so on. Anyway, always interesting to think about what history has to teach us. But now we're going to have 4 quick fire presentations. Now I'm emphasizing the quick element of that, so rationed slidification, and to introduce recent research and interventions that suggest new ways of working and engaging with youth in the digital world. Our wonderful Youth Insight researcher who has brought this event together, Millie Jonas, who's sitting in the middle with all the tech wizardry that we could muster, is very concerned that we actually think not just about risk, but about response and about the ways in which we reimagine the world. So first we're going to hear from Jo Hall on Channel 4's groundbreaking study, Gen Z Trends, Truth and Trust. And Jo's a senior researcher at Channel 4, specialising in cultural and strategic insight. I told you that we needed to know what they knew. And he helped to deliver that research into the lives of young people today, as well as Mirror on Masculinities, a guide for brands to engage and connect with young men in content and advertising. Next time, we're going to hear from Michael Kane, who will speak on what we can learn from Public First's work about the nature and circulation of conspiracy thinking in schools. And Michael is the policy manager in Public First's education practice, and he's working with the Commission for Countering Conspiracies in Schools. Thirdly, we're going to hear from Shabnella Saeed, Head of Education and Director of Digital Schoolhouse at UKI, the Association for UK Interactive Entertainment, and get the entertainment perspective. And she is a trailblazer in computing education and founded the acclaimed Digital Schoolhouse program. And her play-based learning advocacy is reflected in a wide range of published works. And finally, Damien McBeath joins us to share his approach to smartphones at John Wallace Church of England Academy, where he is principal. And as principal, he's been leading transformative changes, including the nationally recognised Smartphone-Free Initiative, discussed in Parliament, and having achieved, we're overseeing 11 academies, 6 of which have achieved outstanding Ofsted ratings. So please can you welcome this distinguished stellar array to the stage. Thank you, and insert. Okay. Right, who is first? Jo.
Yes. Thank you for having me. I was just saying before that I usually present this kind of research to people who make programs or our commercial clients, so big companies like Barclays or NatWest, or whoever it is. So it's quite nice to be talking about young people in a room full of people who are actually kind of on the ground impacting this reality. And I ain't going to pretend to be an expert on that. I work in TV. I do a lot of research around programs and marketing and that kind of thing. But what I do think is that we can hopefully provide a bit of an insight into what the media industry, how it's viewing this situation with young people, and the kind of things that we're calling for at Channel 4 to try and help it. As much as I'm a researcher and I'm really into data behind all the findings, I've probably got 9.5 minutes now, so I've done my best to really cut out most of the data. There's 4 presentations. You're probably going to forget it as soon as I'm off the stage anyway. But that's because as well, Channel 4 are really in the business of storytelling. And kind of every great story starts with a great protagonist, which could be me, actually, because I am born 1 week into the 2000s, so firmly part of Gen Z myself, kind of eternally young in some people's eyes, I think. But it does mean that, to get my perspective, it's not just about me, because there's 13.2 million people in the Gen Z cohort, which is 13 to 28-year-olds in the UK today. So our protagonist is those, specifically the 2,000 that we surveyed last year across the depth and breadth of the UK, and 30 that we visited in more detail to get kind of that ethnographic background on youth culture, right down from Penrith in Cornwall up to Aberdeen in Scotland. It's only really by understanding this that we can get under the skin of those 3 T words, with a little bit of alliteration on screen. What are the trends driving youth culture? What is their relationship with truth, and who is it that they're actually trusting within that media landscape? Hopefully you've all been watching Educating Yorkshire. I've chatted to people already who have been. We know that it's been 12 years since we last did it. Obviously it was iconic back at the time. And we're really seeing how in that 12 years at Thornhill Community Academy, how school life has changed for students and for educators alike, which I'm sure a lot of you know about and you spoke to already. But actually, I think what is interesting, and probably more interesting, is that ultimately what we're seeing is the norms of youth culture, from relationship drama to heartwarming friendships to worrying about exams or just moaning about whatever's on the school lunch menu. These are kind of things which are the same as when all of us were at school. And the problem with generational thinking, and a lot of generational research as well, is that we can often forget that this is a life stage that we all go through. And that means that the things that we hear about Gen Z in the media, some of the headlines, they're often just an exaggeration of the way that young people have always been. Which is why shows like The In-Betweeners and Derry Girls are still our most popular with our younger demographics on the streaming platforms. They're the ones that still continue to resonate. And the reason why, with our kind of new focus and strategy on terms of youth-focused drama, current affairs, Happy to find the boss, anyone watch that, it's great. And also our kind of YouTube original first content as well. These are the kind of things which is where we need to get a bit more in terms of how we adapt the things which have always resonated into the new context and cultural shifts. And there's been a lot of cultural shifts over the last 10 years or so. The world's gone from looking a little bit like this, kind of when I was growing up in 2000, through to this. Now, we know that this has been affected by a lot of kind of technological and political events over the last 20 years or so. It really hits home for me watching Educating Yorkshire. And we saw BlackBerry on screen before, and BBM, BlackBerry Messenger, was a big thing for me in school. And Newsround, not necessarily ChatGPT and TikTok conspiracies. It's the generation born between 1987 and 2012. Some of our first phones were Nokia's, while others in that cohort weren't even born when the first iPhone launched. So it's really important to remember that these kind of major events have taken place within 14 of the most turbulent and life-affirming years of everyone's life. So it's pretty hard to compare my experience as a 25-year-old to those who are still going through puberty, right? The cumulative impact of these events, though, has been massive, and we've heard some of that already, I think. And this is where we can start to apply some of that generational thinking to it. Obviously, this is research which goes as far as 28, and we're kind of speaking to a bit more of a younger group today, but hopefully this can show some of the trends as we move into kind of later teenhood and adulthood that we're really seeing as impacts. The 2 big impacts that I want to touch upon today are really affecting the Gen Z cohort as a whole. And this is something that we should all be taking on board when we're dealing with young people, but especially for us in the kind of media world, they're really important for us to be thinking about, not just in program, but also in kind of the messaging that we're sending to the industry, both commercially, but also kind of through policy and regulation as well. And the first is that those kind of traditional markers of adulthood, like home ownership, marriage, having children, they're really shifting, and we see this when we speak to young people, especially kind of those in the in-depth interviews, kind of that go a bit beyond the data. For many young people, these major life milestones are happening later and later, and are often feeling slightly unaffordable or out of reach in some circumstances. I can definitely resonate with a few of that, financial independence particularly. It's no surprise then that our research shows Gen Z are most concerned about issues closest to home, such as the cost of living, like we all are, or things like their own personal well-being. And I think we've seen some data on that already. So while this delayed adulthood is having quite a noticeable impact on the mindsets and worldviews of young people, there is also that significant repercussion on the world of media and culture. And actually, a lot of this is actually quite positive. With less responsibility and more time to work out their identity, we're seeing a bit of a generational shift in the way that young people socialise, experiment, and pursue their passions. We obviously know that there are those kind of key downsides, but at the same time, young people always make the best out of a tricky situation, and it's important to remember that when we think about how they're kind of redefining later teenhood and adulthood. These things that we see online are not necessarily just TikTok trends, they are genuine generational shifts. And this is being dovetailed really with the second major impact, and it's probably a bit more of a severe impact, and one that kind of we're speaking to today quite a lot. This idea of media fragmentation. So as you can see on screen, young people spent a significantly high proportion of their day on social media and YouTube, 64% in total versus 34% for all adults, and that only kind of grows and continues to grow when you go further down the ages. And kind of while TV and even streaming has traditionally been dominated by those select few content sources, in this world of YouTube and social, the possibilities are seemingly endless. So this allows for hyper-individualization and curation, kind of like a Spotify playlist. Youth culture is starting to feel like a bit of a best-of collection. So picking the best of everything out there. We call them information magpies. So they're picking and choosing from across a different range of viewpoints and opinions. That can be great for creating cross cultures and sparking niche communities and all the positive things that online culture does bring. But it does mean, and there's obviously going to be a but in this presentation, when it comes to Gen Z interacting and receiving news media, we are seeing quite a significant change. So this chart on here from Reuters News Institute shows that social media has overtaken traditional sources of news amongst young people. Now, this is not automatically a bad thing. We know that the industry needs to evolve to the needs of young people. As one of our multimedia news producers, Manor Aklak, said, young people do care about what's going on in the world, but who's telling that story can play a really big role. But there are massive implications for the way that Gen Z think about the truth and who it is that they're going to trust. So overall levels of trust are actually higher for young people. You might call us naive, but I think it's more optimistic. But what we are seeing at the same time, and this is the key thing from our whole research really, is that there's a much flatter distribution compared to older generations. Traditional brands and mainstream media don't necessarily receive that hierarchical level of confidence. And a key component of this is that young people are often talking about things like bias and agendas in news media, approaching most information really with cynicism. And this kind of goes beyond trust in many ways and is more of that kind of deeper philosophical confusion. What even is bias? Is it a strong point of view? Is it one that they just disagree with, or one that lacks balance? And what was really key in our interviews and focus groups with young people is that they just don't have clear answers. And this uncertainty kind of makes the media landscape in general really difficult to navigate. So at Channel 4, we fundamentally believe that objective truth is a public good. So while we are there in youth culture and in the online spaces, playing an active role, we don't believe that this kind of shift towards a more fragmented media world should result in the absence of truth and fact. It should be really easy for young people and everyone to navigate those sources of regulated truth. And I think
I'm not sure I can deliver a happy ending, but anyway. How am I doing this? Cool. Just a quick one. Thanks for the warm introduction, Carla. It's great to see some of Public First research already being highlighted so far. So I'm Michael, and as has already been said, I'm a policy manager in Public First education practice. So for a tiny bit of context about Public First before we go into it, I think it's worth going into. We're essentially a public policy research agency, and today I'm going to talk about the work we've been doing for the Commission into countering online conspiracies in schools. The Commission is generously funded by the Pears Foundation, with Public First effectively acting as a secretariat for all functions of the Commission. We're guided by 17 independent commissioners and a separate advisory board. Not quite sure what's going on.
Keeping going.
Trying to get progressively louder as it always goes on. This presentation is obviously, I've only got 10 minutes. I want to try and be straight to the point. Basically going to run through some of the findings from our first report all the way back in February 2025 and kind of give you the kind of young person's angle as well. So we're going to go through that. First though, I think first of all, worth thinking about the kind of founding principles of the Commission. So the Commission first came into action in spring 2024 when we first started hearing, basically through conversations with like many people in this room, that young people are increasingly becoming exposed to conspiracy theories in schools. And this is kind of rearing its head in the sense that parents and teachers don't feel like they can support children in this sense. And we wanted to establish these founding principles to basically ensure that our work was grounded in the lived experience of the impacted groups that we're talking to and writing about. And, importantly, we want to focus on the impact of young people, and the focus on schools is kind of make it straightforward. Obviously, public first is a lot of work in schools policy, but also schools is a massive important pivot point for a young person's life. It's where we learn how to live, I think, and I think it's a really important place to kind of see that kind of battleground. And schools and teachers and parents are essentially the people who are going to be at the front line tackling these conspiracy theories. So I feel like I was a bit self-conscious when I saw Joe's slide and all the fun kind of pictures. And I've just got basically all the kind of data about what we've done. So try not to overwhelm myself with that. But basically this gives you kind of overview of what all the work that fed into our report in February 2025. So that started off with the literature review and kind of expert evidence sessions with people from the sector, probably some people who are know in the room. And then a series of quantitative and qualitative research work we did with young people, school staff and parents. So this was all the way from national representative polls to in-depth focus groups talking about the issues in detail. And from that, we kind of had 12 findings. I'm not going to run through them all individually. I'm not going to try and do all as a slide because they're a little bit ridiculous. But they're all there if you want to take a picture of them. They're all indirectly relevant to young people, of course, but obviously some of them are relevant to teachers, some are relevant to parents. This slide is purely going to focus on the ones that are particularly relevant for young people. So I think first, this is a finding which I think is really good as an introductory finding. Before we go into what sort of conspiracy theories young people will be exposed to, the extent of their exposure, I think it's worth recognizing, I think this is a point that Joe kind of talks about a lot, was that young people are fundamentally operating in different information silos and digital world to older people, to adults even. And you can see that in the kind of, Joe's obviously gone through a lot of the evidence around how young people are consuming their news through social media and adults through more traditional channels. And I think that's a very intuitive point, but that was borne out in our research as well. So you can see 77% of 11 to 12-year-olds are using social media, despite the age limit for most sites being 13. I think this is basically rearing its head. Obviously, there's a lot of conspiracy theories there, but the plethora and the kind of the divergence in essence. So obviously, as you would expect, adults are more likely to have encountered conspiracy theories about Princess Diana, for instance. And I think this is interesting as well because it probably shows that young people are going to require a different kind of response and kind of handholding approach through this process because they're simply being exposed to different areas. And then kind of following on from that, so we did some polling of school staff throughout the project, as also said, and in essence, school staff were feeling that, this is quite interesting, so they were feeling that pupils weren't necessarily bringing up these conspiracy theories because they necessarily believed in them forthrightly. They don't fundamentally believe all the things that they're seeing and talking about. It was more just so that they thought it was funny and that they could have caused controversy and so on. So it's an interesting point there because I think that has ramifications for how we address this issue as well. Because it's not simply about saying to kids and young people, this is incorrect. You have to get to the foundational point is this is harmful, rather than just simply telling kids this is wrong. So I think that kind of speaks to a wider systemic issue there as well. And then kind of following on from this, most young people, despite encountering conspiracy theories regularly throughout their lives, they don't believe they're necessarily an issue, which is quite interesting because there's a kind of contrast there between, growing academic literature. So we've heard a lot today about concerns about the digital world, but also I think the implications it has for conspiracy theories. but that isn't necessarily something young people then feel themselves necessarily. And I think that has interesting implications because, well, while people's, it's, so I think, but I don't think we can generalize too much. I think young people do believe they are harmful to an extent, despite maybe the kind of the cloud of conspiracy theories. When you tell them individual conspiracy theories, they, a plurality there. The top three, they do believe they are somewhat and very harmful. So potentially some green shoots for optimism there. I think now this is when the presentation kind of pivots towards the solutions. And I think this is one thing that's really positive. And it kind of links to Joe's point potentially about public trust from young people. While there's historically low trust in public institutions and politics and so on, there is generally high levels of trust in parents and teachers from young people. And I think this is really, really interesting because that, shows that, that parents and teachers have a role to play in terms of combating conspiracy theories. However, it wouldn't be a presentation about conspiracy theories. However, it is worth raising that this trust in adults does generally decline as pupils get older, which I think is a kind of point that everyone here intuitively can kind of get from their childhood, right? That's kind of natural to an extent. But I think that shows that really, if we are to address this issue properly, it has to come with early intervention. So that kind of pivot point between primary school and secondary school, when kids are starting to get their phone, as all the research today talked about has kind of elucidated, that is the real kind of turning point to how can we help kids and young people, how can we help shape their experience of the digital world, rather than coming at it too late when they have already set their habits, when they already maybe distrust parents and teachers. I think finally going to reflect on this finding as well. This is kind of quite a general, broad finding. I think it speaks to a lot of the kind of a lot of the presentations we've had so far, which is, in essence, there should be a pedagogy, not punishment approach. This was born out of polling for both parents and school staff. In essence, I think our wider research shows that the kids and young people who are exposed to conspiracy theories are more likely to already feel sidelined. For instance, children with special educational needs are more likely to be susceptible. An approach of punishment and telling them it's simply wrong is not going to do them any good. It might simply sideline them even further and make them more susceptible to conspiracy theories in the long run. So I think there's also a kind of last point here is that both school staff and parents felt the most important approach was essentially to get young people to think more critically about the sources they're interrogating in school and then try and translate that over into the digital world. So that, for me, 10 years ago was probably source analysis of history. Obviously, it's changed a lot right now. And that obviously is quite interesting with the kind of curriculum assessment review coming up. And in essence, we need to see that review kind of deliver media literacy across the curriculum rather than just in an hour of citizenship every 2 weeks. I'll quickly reflect on what's next for the Commission. So in essence, we've been generously funded again by the Pears Foundation to carry on with phase 2. So part of that is implementing the recommendations. We've been working with the Department of Education to get keeping children safe education guidance updated this September. You might have seen, so they've had disinformation and misinformation and conspiracy theories added as safeguarding issues. And we've also been working with the curriculum assessment team to try and embed media literacy in their reports. And then we've also been attending a lot of events like this to try and get the name up for the Commission and try and get that create a conversation as well and engaging with Parliament. And most importantly, we're going to be publishing more research in March 2026, which in essence, we've already done the polling this summer. And again, the issue has not gone away. It's going to be a long-term issue. And we've got more focus groups coming in the next few weeks. That's going to be with young people, with teachers, but also youth workers as well. We need to recognise that this issue can't be solved just by schools. Children aren't just being exposed and talking about the digital world within the school terms. Youth workers need to be part of that as well.
Good afternoon. So, I'm here from UKI, which is the Trade Association for Video Games, here to talk about video games in particular and the role that it plays. Let's get through that. I've only got 10 minutes. Not the important thing here. Okay, games, size, it's huge. We've all heard about games. We hear our children talk about games. We hear about news and media and culture. In 2024, people in the UK spent over £7.6 billion on video games and video game-related merchandise. Films such as Mario and Sonic are sort of common household names. Lots of parents take their children to see them. They're huge, phenomenal hits. Those are icons that we are familiar with, even if we haven't played those games. We all know Mario. We all know Sonic. There's about 2,600 registered oh my goodness, sorry. Games companies here in the UK. Over 55% of game development happens outside of London and the Southeast. So the industry is very widespread with clusters all over the country. So development is nationwide. If we think about games and culture and just think about in the room, I only have 10 minutes. I'm sorry, I don't have time for a live Q&A, right? But if I did have more than 10 minutes and I was able to ask you, even if we sort of randomly pick someone in the audience about your journey with games, most of you, dare I say all of you, might be able to recall some incident, some memory, maybe one or more, that involved gameplay. And I'm going to hypothesize that you'll remember that those memories, by and large, will be fond memories. You'll recall joyfulness, laughter, happiness, maybe companionship with friends, family members, and siblings. The same is still true today. All right, this is not today. This is back then, right? So this is my journey with video games. And actually, my first games console was this little thing called the Game & Watch. And that's before I even knew what a games console was. For me, it was just a device that I played tennis on. I only played one game, Snoopy Tennis. I loved Snoopy. Any other Snoopy fans? Quick question. Yeah, great. Thank God I'm not the only one. But it was just brilliant. And I could take it with me everywhere, in the car, outside, wherever, anytime I wanted to get away from my siblings, just playing with the games. All right, not the context of what I'm trying to say. But the second thing, PlayStation 1 was my big console. I've wonderful memories. I remember being really jealous of my aunt because she was the first one in our family to get it. And then I remember my mum picking up on that jealousy and then saving for ages to buy me one. And that became a family console, and tackling Tomb Raider just blew my mind. So as you can see, my choice of games is quite eclectic. I mean, Doom and Pac-Man, they're worlds apart. So, but if we think about stereotypes, I asked ChatGPT give me a stereotypical image, and that's literally the first thing it created, right? I'm like, great, it's good for something. But there's so many stereotypes in that one image. You've got a dark background, you've got a male, and he's looking quite angry, all right? So there's a lot of stereotypes there. And we hear these. I mean, sort of growing up in the headlines. Right? So once upon a time, I was a teacher of computing, and I remember sort of looking around at the tech and sort of keeping up to date with the news. Video games cause violence. Video games cause aggression. What's all over the news? That's pretty much been disproven now. Video games are addictive. All right, there's studies on both sides of that argument, but largely, by and large, it's about balance, and the idea that video games cause addiction is losing weight. But still prevalent today are the arguments that playing games are a complete waste of time and that they lead to social isolation. The truth overall is quite different. And actually, you don't need to go too far back, maybe just to lockdown, where we had the pandemic and video games brought people together. Playing games online allowed people to connect with each other in social environments where they would not have been able to. We legally were not allowed to do so otherwise, right? We know, we hear incidents where Animal Crossing, this picture on the right, where you could create your own world, your own island, but you could visit other people's islands. People literally hosted Shakespearean plays in Animal Crossing. It's incredible. It's something to be seen. But if we think about Candy Crush, Sudoku on your mobile phone, Tetris, oh my gosh, how do people play Tetris? Somebody at some point or another has. And actually there's studies out there that suggest that games like that, like Tetris, can have and can actually improve cognitive function in your brain and your memory recall, as well as improving and reducing your stress and anxiety. Games, okay, the teacher in me has to say this, right? The games do have educational value, hands down they do. They have games like Minecraft are commonly and actively used in schools all over to teach a wide variety of subjects, not just computing, but history, architecture, art, design, mathematics, Minecraft is literally where you can create anything you can imagine. And teachers are learning how to harness that and use that. I once saw a student that used Minecraft to create, they connected this, digressing a little bit, but they connected physical components with a Minecraft world. And you would go into Minecraft and you would see this kind of digital representation of a smoothie machine, and you would sort of pick your flavors, and out would pour a real smoothie that you could actually drink. You know, it was brilliant. But your limit is your imagination. I know we're talking about youth, but since we're talking about stereotypes, this is a true story that I just wanted to share for a moment, because I think it completely blows so many of those stereotypes out the water. Think in contrast to the image that ChatGPT created. This is also another AI-generated image, just to anonymize the person in real life. But you know, this is a lady in her mid-60s. She has sort of undiagnosed learning difficulties and so lacks confidence. She has significant mobility issues. On a bad day, she struggles to make herself a cup of tea, let alone leave the house. She has cognitive impairment. On a bad day, she'll forget her sentence halfway through her sentence. So sometimes, as a person who, by their personality, is very outgoing, loves socializing, sometimes that can get really difficult. And if anyone that's ever known anyone that's been in similar circumstances, that has huge impact on your mental health and well-being. She discovered video games when she was in her early 30s. And today, games on her tablet, word games, puzzle games, and those type of games on her tablets, not just keep her brain engaged and active, which is great for the cognitive impairment, and that's in slow decline and trying to slow that, but actually makes her happy. And that's a big thing. On those bad days when she can't get out of bed, games make her happy. And she's not the only one. The average age of the UK video game player is 28. 51% of 36 to 50-year-olds play games, and that number is on the increase. Why? Because being playful is instinctive. It is part of who we are as human beings. We play. If we speak to any developmental psychologist who studies early years, it's focused on playfulness. We use play to teach our children how to count, how to recognize colors, and how to read, and numbers, and storytelling. It is part of who we are. Video games are just the 21st century embodiment of that. That's all it is. And that's why we do it so naturally. They are powerful, absolutely powerful. And there's a lot there, and I realize I'm running out of time. So I'm just going to focus on the fact that they give us the freedom to fail in a safe space, in a place that's not embarrassing, in a place where no one is going to talk you down, in a place where it's okay. And in the words of this lady, who severely lacks confidence and has almost zero self-esteem, in her words, it doesn't judge me. The games I play don't judge me. I can get it wrong, and I can keep trying until my own pace until I get it right. We want our students to feel the same way in classrooms, but they don't. They get their test wrong. How many times do they get the chance to repeat it? How many of them want to repeat it? And yet you put them in front of a game and they fail that level in that game. They will keep trying. You don't have to tell them. You might have to tell them to stop trying, but you don't have to tell them to try. There's this intrinsic motivation built inside of us to carry on going. That resilience that we look for in our education systems is there. I won't dwell too much on esports, just to say that it is around, esports, if you've not heard of it, is competitive gameplay. And it's huge and it's growing. There's sort of hundreds of millions of players and spectators worldwide. These are in-person matches that take place as massive arenas with hundreds of millions of viewers online watching these matches. The prize funds are in the million. As I said, it's a growing economy. Part of my work is Digital Schoolhouse, and we, for the past almost 10 years, have been using esports as a vehicle for delivering careers education and a practical implementation.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. Absolute privilege to be standing and sharing a little story in front of you. I'm going to try and do something without a screen. So I don't know if we can switch it off or if we can put something in front of it. Okay, I'm going to try and live by what I'm going to preach. My name's Damien Macbeth. I'm a principal of the John Wallace Academy. All through Academy, our youngest is 4 months old, and we go all the way up to 19-year-olds. We have the whole gambit on site. There are 3 events that I'm going to share with you to begin with. I will stick to time. I know head teachers have this reputation of just chatting, but I will try to stick to time. 2003, I was a teacher in a school in Southwark. There was an event that happened the evening before where many of our students witnessed a stabbing in the Peabody estate near the school. And they watched the older brother of one of the children in my class was stabbed. It was a gang-related incident. We arrived in school the next day and immediately got together as a staff team to say, how do we deal with this? How do we deal with the community that have just witnessed this on the estate the evening before? By midday, we had a whole team of ed psychs on site who were working with us as a school. We carried on teaching. We wanted to give the children normality, give them routine. And the ed psychs were there to do a lot of care and work with children. Fast forward a few years, I was a regional director working with ARC schools. Woke up in the morning to the news that Grenfell Tower was on fire, which was one of the towers for one of our schools. We lost children in the fire. We lost families. I had to go and support the head teacher addressing his community. As I arrived on site, the head teacher's keeping things going, keeping normality going. A huge amount of support came in. Place to Be, incredible charity, wrapped their arms around that community, gave support, gave help, gave guidance. I'm starting with 2 events in my career that have shaped my thinking on this. Last month, there was a murder that took place in America that nearly every single child in my school has seen. And they were coming to talk to me openly in the playground and saying, oh, have you seen about Charlie Kirk? I've seen Charlie. And they were talking about it like it was normal and like that this was an everyday event. And in the past, those children would have had so much care, so much protection and support and guidance wrapped around them. And the reason I'm starting with this is because this isn't a conversation around smartphones in schools, which is what I'm going to talk about. This isn't a conversation around social media. This is the whole of childhood and what we are willing to accept as normal. And it's not okay for children to see a horrific murder. That is not normal. And we have got a duty to stand up and say, actually, enough's enough. We're going to do something about this. So I'm passionate about this. This is something that means a lot to me. I am seeing it daily, and the longer this goes on, the more we see. So let's talk about the impact of screens and phones and all of this on the whole journey. So some of my babies, my nursery is a beautiful place to be. You walk into there, you can kind of just relax. You feel kind of the tension go down. I was in there the other day walking around with some teachers, and we walked into the nursery. I was greeted immediately with a youngster who comes up to me, saying, I'm a dinosaur, Ray. So they were doing some kind of play in the sandpit around that. Teacher sat down to do story time and was reading from a big book. But they scanned the big book and put it on the screen. So the class are sat there watching the screen. And you think, wow, what's happening here? You look at what's come in from the government recently, the early years assessments, baseline assessments, we now have to deliver on a screen. I was furious when I saw it. I was like, how are we doing this? How are we normalizing iPads for children? But that's what's put in place. As a head teacher, if I don't do that, that would be maladministration. I would then have to justify why I haven't done the early years baseline correctly. So we started putting things in place in our schools, such as curtains. So we have screen-free time. We've taken all of the whiteboards and screens out of our nursery setting. Children don't have access to screens in the nursery. You don't need it. If you're telling a story, then you should tell a story. If you want children to develop their curiosity, the whole kind of love of play, that happens in real connection. That doesn't happen on a screen. So we've stripped it from the nursery. In all our primary classrooms now, we have curtains in front of the whiteboards so that teachers are planning when they use screens rather than it being default. Because for too long, we go into schools, you turn your whiteboard on, you leave it on all day, and you don't realize you've just given 7 hours worth of screen time to the kids without thinking about it. And we know the impact that has. The World Health Organization has told us the impact of that on children's eyes, on their health, on their well-being. It's not okay just to leave screens on, and yet we do it just as a habit. And I don't think anyone's ever thought about it. I don't think any school set out to say, do you know what? I think the best way to deliver this content is through 7 hours of PowerPoint. And yeah, that's what we do. So I won't rattle on PowerPoint. I could do a whole hour on PowerPoint and how it's destroyed education. Okay. So the way learning at its best is you read something, you make sense of what you've read, or you look at a picture, you look at a great piece of artwork, you kind of make sense of what you've read. You then argue and debate with the person next to you. What do you see? What do you think of this? And you have a conversation. The teacher then gets involved and then says, do you know what? When other people have looked at this picture, this is what they see and this is what they think. And all of a sudden you have this conversation across generations. And that's great learning. That's how we take learning forward. What happens now? You walk into a classroom and the teacher says, here's 5 bullet points. In an hour's time, I'm going to assess you on these 5 bullet points to see if you can remember the 5 bullet points that I put on the board here today. So PowerPoint has been an issue. I also think that there's a lot of talk from EdTech, I think taking the baton from Beeb and Kidron. EdTech in schools has been an absolute disaster. And we know it has, because you only need to look at what's happened to children's reading scores, to math scores, to science scores across westernized countries who have embraced it. And you see that reading is in decline. Children's adult IQ is in decline. Has anyone come across the Flynn effect? So the Flynn effect is kind of IQ, and it's gone on it's been measured for over 100 years. And it's very clear, year on year, generation after generation, people get smarter, IQs improve, until about 2010. And then in Western countries, it started to flatline. And it's now in decline in countries such as the US, in the UK, in Norway, it's really declining. In countries where they haven't embraced as much tech, you're seeing those rates, those IQs still continue to rise. So if you want to read more about that, it's the Flynn effect. And then when it starts to go backwards, it's called the negative Flynn effect. It's really quite interesting. So EdTech in schools is an issue. Then you get to kind of secondary age, and you've got the whole world of social media for children to try and engage. And some of the talks we've heard today, this is the world in which they live in. I've got children in year 5 who can tell me what the best angle is to take a photo of themselves. That's a 5-year-old. And at first it sounds funny and you kind of think, okay, that's a fact, getting the right selfie. But actually what they're telling you is that their world in which they inhabit, this isn't something that they're growing up with on the side, this is their world, is one of judgmental. It's one of comparison. It's one where they are so affected by how others see them, they know what angle to hold their phone to take that picture. So social media is a big issue that children need to work through. When we looked at this issue as a school, I had to say as a head teacher, what can I do about this? And what impact can I make? So the impact that you can make as a head teacher, you can look at your role. And first and foremost, my duty is to keep children safe. We introduced a phone ban because for years we'd had a phone ban. We had the keep in your bag, keep your bag zipped away. And then let's hope that these children can show a level of restraint that no adults, I'd guess no one in this room, can show. At an age where they are developing independence. Teenage years is all about pushing boundaries. It's about finding where your limits are. And you can't have eyes on children 24/7. You just can't do it. And it wouldn't be right to. So you want them to develop and grow and push those boundaries in a safe place. And you can't do that when you've got access to a phone. Because even as a teacher or as a parent, if I know my daughter doesn't have access to the internet because I didn't give her a phone, but the child next to her who says, come into the bathroom, look at this, and they go into a cubicle together and she sees something horrific. That can't be undone. You cannot undo that. So as a head teacher, I've got a duty to keep children safe. And the only way that I thought I could keep children safe was by saying, let's put something in place so they cannot access their devices. There are ways of doing it. You can break into them. There's lots of things online as to how you can get into the pouches that we put in place. But on the whole, it doesn't happen. We've got about 98% compliance. We put this in place in January of last year. Within weeks, we saw transformation to the school. We saw children talking to each other more. We saw them talking to teachers more. We called in Canterbury Christchurch University because we recognised that something quite seismic was happening. So they came in to check our research and to look into it for us. And what we found was this: the number of online safeguarding incidents, so online bullying, cyber abuse, reduced by 80%. Now, that was quite staggering when we looked at those figures, because this is reported on My Concern, which is our school portal. When we looked at the numbers, we were quite surprised. We were concerned, first of all, that they just weren't telling us. Was this happening underground? And they just weren't reporting it. But actually, the children reported, well, it never starts out as name-calling or abuse. It starts out as a conversation that goes wrong. And they weren't having those conversations in person, so it cycles, and it got worse and worse and worse until somebody said something quite hateful or impolite. So that's reduced by 80%. It's had a massive, massive impact, and the children tell us the reason why is that they're talking to each other more. We've seen more engagement in lessons. Behaviour incidents for disruptive behaviour is down 40%. And teachers themselves are reporting better relationships with the students. They're reporting they are happier. They feel they can have a more authentic conversation. And there's some research that was carried out that will be released later this year, in which teachers are saying that they feel happier at work because they don't have that fear that they're going to be filmed or recorded, or every single thing that they say to a child could be posted and shared online. And by having the policy where phones are locked away, we've eradicated that fear amongst teachers, and it's making them feel a lot happier. We're seeing that in our teacher surveys. That's the kind of the spiel from me, because I don't want to go over time. I'm hugely passionate about this issue, this subject. It's not just a conversation around technology. It's a conversation around childhood and what we are doing as adults to keep children safe in the world in which they live. Thank you.
So it's not inevitable. We can take action. Congratulations, audience, for your restraint in having your mobile phones in your pockets, apart from some photographing of slides. But I can tell you, because some of those numbers were really quite tiny, all the slides are going to be distributed to you. So you'll have those really fascinating facts and figures and insights. Now, the other thing I've learned from Jan is that we will do much better when we stretch and move about. So what we're going to do now is we're going to stretch and move about, have our cup of tea, and then we're going to discuss. So giving you the opportunity to just reflect a moment on what you would like to explore with the speakers, and also with our young people, respondents, who are going to come next. So she's giving me 4 fingers. I can't believe we're going to be back in 4 minutes. That's going to be... So definitely by 4 o'clock, more toilets downstairs if you need them. Okay, thank you.